Everyone, we are going to be making lard today. So what lard is just rendered fat, and what we have is actually pork fat, and we got 2 pigs processed on our property. So we are going to be doing this process today to make lard. And if you ever research lard, it's something that our ancestors, our grandparents did for years before us. They make phenomenal pastries, pies, baked goods, things like that. It's also really good fat to cook with, to saute with, and things like that. So that's what we're going to be doing today, is rendering our own lard. All right, so these 2 pigs that we actually got processed from a local butcher, and he was kind enough to process all of our trimmings, all of the fat from the pork, all of the ends and all of that, and put it into individual bags that are kind of manageable chunks. And we also had a friend that didn't want to use up their fat for any reason, so they gave it to us. So we also have their fat to start rendering into lard as well. So that's what we're going to be doing today. So I want to show you the first step. So what we are going to do is take our big pieces of fat, and they just come in random sized chunks. And you're going to want to just kind of chop them up into smaller pieces and then throw them in, whatever kind of stock pot you have. I'm going to be doing it in the oven. There's many ways that you can do this, probably in the crock pot, probably stovetop, I'm sure. And you can just use whatever method works best for you. And this would probably work. Ours is all completely frozen, so this would probably work best if you let it thaw a little bit on the counter. It'll cut easier, but I have found that it actually cuts the best if it's still a little bit frozen. Otherwise, it kind of just gets too mushy with the fat already kind of melted. So I'm just kind of chopping it up into random sized chunks and throwing it into the big cast iron pot that we have. I already have 2 going in the oven. The 2 that I have in the oven aren't chopped up into small pieces, and I'm just going to keep stirring them as they go. So you're going to want to turn your oven to 220 because you don't want to burn the lard. You just kind of want to slowly render it down into the cooking fat. And here in the cast iron pot is just all of the pieces of fat just chopped up into smaller pieces. Here you'll see all of the fat starting to render down, and you could see here I didn't cut it into smaller pieces, which is fine. It's still going to render, but it might just take a little bit longer. From what I've read online, you're going to want to actually use a strainer over your pot, so that way when this melts, it's going to melt the drippings of the lard into your pot and continue to melt all of this down, but it's not going to burn your pieces. So over time, the fat is going to drip and melt down to the bottom of the pot, and while the bits that are not the fat will stay kind of at the top of the colander, and you'll want to mash and stir occasionally to keep that from burning. And the process is complete when all of that is left on the top is connective tissue that won't melt down any further. And it could probably take several hours depending on how much you're rendering at a time. I also mentioned that you could do it on the stovetop, so some of it I'm doing right on the stovetop, and you can see it's just slowly simmering. I just have it on low. Okay, so we've been rendering a lot of it down. I'm ready to start straining it. So I just have a quart jar here with a funnel and then another strainer, and that's just going to strain off any excess stuff that didn't boil down, that didn't render down into the lard. And so we're just going to go ahead and strain it. There's probably easier ways to do this. I don't have a huge strainer, and I just thought with that funnel it would create a way for me to get it into the jar without getting the oil all over. And it's going to go from a liquid, and then it will solidify to kind of like not a completely hard solid, but it'll be almost like a Crisco texture. Another great thing about rendering the fat down into lard is the fact that you're already raising the animal. You're already putting all the money and time and energy into raising them from baby to processing. And we didn't process these pigs by ourselves. We had a local butcher do it, like I had mentioned. So we're already paying per poundage, for the processing fee. So I just figure it's another way to utilize 100% of the animal. I've also read where you can actually make lotion out of tallow or lard. And tallow actually is from beef fat, rendered beef fat, and lard is from rendered pork fat. And it's different cuts of the animal. But I'm going to try my hand at making some lotion with the lard. And then another reason why I want to try it out is we're not huge into baking. I mean, if I do, it's usually a paleo or a grain-free. But I want to try making some homemade pie crusts, and I've heard lard is fabulous for that. And what better than to try it out when we have free lard coming in. So I'll show you here what we're doing. So I heard to put it in a bread pan. This is just the rendered lard. You can see it's still in the liquid form. And I'm just putting the tin foil on the side so that when it does set up in the fridge, I can kind of take it out a little bit easier in a huge block. So I'm just going to set it in the fridge like this. And then let it kind of get solid when it cools. And then I'll take it out, and then I'm going to cut it into smaller pieces, kind of like thicker pieces of banana bread. And then I'll individually wrap those and freeze those. That way when you take it out to use for seasoning your cast iron skillets or for baking or for making lotion or whatever, the smaller size bars would be a lot easier to manage. Okay, so we're at the end of our day of rendering all this fat down into lard, and you could see this is my little bread pan I was showing you earlier, and it's still just a really nice, almost like a frosting texture. And this is probably, I would say, 4 or 5 hours, so it's still got time to cool down. So it must really maintain that heat for quite a while, because you could tell towards the edges it's a lot thicker than in the middle. So this one, like I had said, if you're going to see the yellowish, you're going to notice that it's still hot, and then as it cools, it's going to turn to white. And you'll want to make sure they're not shelf stable by themselves. So you want to make sure to put them in a fridge or a freezer. And I'm probably going to do some of both, because as you can see, I already have probably 15 to 20 quarts here of lard. Most of mine is probably going to go into homemade soap. You can also do soaps. And also my grandma, I remember this from when I was little, that we used to have stains on our clothes, and we used to send over our my dad's jeans that were oily from the shop. And so she used to have this bar of soap that she used to just rub and rub and rub and rub and rub on those jeans. And I remember back, I don't know why the memory came back today when I was doing this, but she used lye, obviously, which is what you need to make soap saponify. But I remember her using lard in there as well. So you wouldn't think that grease would get grease out, but it's kind of funny how that must work. So anyway, excited to try some new things with that as well. And then I've also read a lot about chapsticks, and yeah, bar soap is something that I want to do too. It's supposed to be super nourishing for the skin, which actually, after working with it all day today, cutting it up in small chunks and getting it into the jars and stuff, it kind of got a little messy at times, but my hands are just like super butter smooth. So this is the leftover stuff that didn't quite render down, and I'm, to be honest, after the whole day, I'm just kind of calling it quits. So the chickens, and like I had said, feed it to all your animals. Go feed it to your chickens, your cats, your dogs, your ducks, whoever wants to eat it will eat it. And like I'd said, when it's cold, -12 degrees, this is going to be a little extra, little extra nourishment for them when it's so cold you can't even do anything outside. So thanks for joining. Make sure to like and subscribe in the video below, and follow along on our journey. Thanks.